Really, I could send the nuclear away.
A couple of follow-ups just for these
no worries.
officers, if I may, because Senator Rhiannon's asked fairly comprehensively around the Hill End, so I will confine my remarks to the other sites and some process questions in general. I might start with SA. There is growing concern in South Australia that the nominated, or at and around the nominated sites, that they may also become default nominated sites for proposals.
Define growing concern. I mean, there's always been concern. It's not growing. Don't be alarmist.
Can I just put some questions to the witnesses?
Sure, you can.
I know you've got strong feelings about this, and you're the chair of the committee, which means it's quite difficult when you interrupt to call on the chair.
You know, we want some reasonable questions. You're putting a slant on it. You're putting your own political slant on it. Ask the questions.
You were pretty good earlier, Senator Edwards. Just let me get some questions.
It's late.
And maybe leave commentary about bananas and stuff until later. The concern that I'm trying to express, if you'd let me finish my sentence, is that the sites that you are undergoing site selection work for may end up as de facto sites for an international waste dump. We've got Royal Commission being undertaken at the same time. People are understandably nervous that there may be tie-ins between the two processes. What can you tell us to set my mind at rest and others' minds at rest that that's not actually what's occurring here?
Yeah. Thank you, Senator. That's a good question, one that you won't be surprised to learn I get asked a fair bit on the consultation processes.
I guess so.
The answer comes with several different layers, but fundamentally the site and the facility that we're looking at siting will not be used for foreign waste or to dispose of intermediate or high-level waste. And there's a range of reasons for that. One, the law currently prohibits, the law does prohibit the import of foreign waste.
Commonwealth law?
Yep. The law also imports the importation of high-level waste.
Yeah.
So that at the legal level, it can't happen. The Radioactive Waste Management Act 2012 is also only structured around a site for Australian waste, Australian low-level and intermediate level waste.
Yeah.
Now, then there's the technical arguments. So if future law was to change, you still couldn't use this site for high-level waste. High-level waste disposal requires deep underground, highly engineered structures. This is a 40-hectare above-ground concrete pad with some buildings around it. The two are completely different. The regulator, the national regulator, ARPANSA, would licence this facility for very specific purposes. It would not, or I can't imagine any regulator would allow a site like this to be used for high-level waste, which requires, as I said, a very different approach. The government of the day, if it tried to do it, would lose community support instantly because it's not the purpose for which the facility was put into the community. We are exploring ways to look at developing a contract with communities around the purpose of the site and the nature of the site, which would establish a legal or binding contract with that community on it. Moreover, the international community, the International Atomic Energy Agency, of which we're a signatory to the Act that sets that up, the best practice and guidelines that it establishes for the management of high-level and intermediate level waste would not allow that to happen, and we would be condemned internationally if that was to occur. So I certainly understand the concerns there that this is somehow a Trojan horse, but I know from discussions with experts and from the way the acts are structured that it just can't happen that way.
Okay, that's a useful summary.
Under the current regime.
Yeah. So there's the legal regime, which is important, but also I don't think anybody is suggesting that you would try and cram internationally sourced spent fuel into the structure that you are proposing to build for domestic waste dump. But there's nothing stopping somebody, opening up a new licensing process to drill half a mile under the existing site.
That would be a completely new licensing and approvals processes that were completely separate to ours. It wouldn't happen under this Act and this process.
All right. Is there any... thank you for the detailed response. I think that's valuable. Is there any crossover, though, between the two processes in terms of personnel or other kinds of collaboration? So, for example, staff or consultants or advisors or anybody with one foot in each camp at this time? with the SA process and yours?
We don't have anyone working for us or consultants, or consultants that we use that are working for the South Australian Royal Commission. We don't engage with the Royal Commission. They haven't engaged with us. I think I've had one meeting when I was in Adelaide with them. It was a pretty perfunctory meeting. They indicated that they were running a very separate process, and they very much emphasise the independence of their process. So there's no crossover, effectively no crossover at all, Senator.
Okay.
What I can't guarantee is that any of the consulting firms we use may not have had people in their teams which may have contributed. We don't know absolutely everybody that works for our consulting firms.
No, it'd be more that whether anybody was directly involved and had a foot in both camps. And it's reassuring to hear you say that there isn't. I presume that was intentional.
Yes, in fact, one of the members of a consulting firm a consulting team that we looked at hiring for our next stage of the process, one of our independent advisory panel members questioned their involvement, given their relationship, or that they had in some way been involved with the South Australian Royal Commission. While we didn't consider there was any conflict of interest, in order to provide assurance, we asked that person to recuse themselves, at least until after the commission was finished.
Okay, I think that's a good practice. So I'm not going to try and give you a hard time for not consulting, because I think it's good that the processes are unfolding as separately as possible. Otherwise, you're going to get dragged into both. But it has been pointed out to me that public consultation over the nominated sites in your national process are clashing with SA Royal Commission consultation. So, for example, in Hawker, it's on the same night as the SA Royal Commission public consultation in Port Augusta. So maybe a tiny bit of diary matching. I wouldn't give you a hard time if you at least deconflicted some of the consultation work that was going on.
That is probably true, but I guess that could provide reassurance. That's a sign that we actually don't talk to each other.
That's why I'm choosing my words really carefully. But I think in a serious sense, if people are engaged in this issue and it's happening in the local areas, it's a shame if you have to choose which nuclear waste dump consultation you go to, because they're both happening at the same time.
We locked in our consultation schedule only just recently, and we're unaware of the South Australian Royal Commission one. I don't know that we can change ours now. We've advertised where it is, but I take your point, Senator.
That wasn't my point, but I think you understand where I'm coming from. When does spent fuel cease going to the US for reprocessing and start going to France? Is that a question for you guys, or would that be better directed to ANSTO?
I think that's better for ANSTO to answer, Senator.
Okay. Just staying on your 6-site public consultation process then, and you might have engaged with this a little bit with Senator Rhiannon, but what's your plan B if all 6 of the nominated sites don't meet your consent criteria that you were discussing before?
At this point, Senator, we don't have, I'm not going to say we don't have a plan B.
Because you'd never know what would happen to that quote.
If we don't get any sites, of course, the government would have to consider what it wanted to do next, whether it wanted to run another round or whether it wanted to follow or develop a new process. But we haven't had that discussion, and that would be a matter for the Minister. Really.
Okay. In relation to the Community Contribution Fund, which I understand, this is second-hand because I haven't been at any of the community consultations. Mm-hmm. So I understand it's a $10 million fund. How is that to be allocated, and what's the decision-making process behind deciding how that contribution fund, as I think it's being described, would be spent?
Okay, that's also a good question, Senator. So the Act establishes that when the site receives a licence to operate, that a fund of at least $10 million will be established under the Act.
At least 10, so
at least 10 million.
Uncapped.
That fund is to be, there isn't a lot of specificity in the Act about how that fund would be administered, but basically the Minister is then a decision maker over how that fund is allocated. He is to form advisory committee, and the Act specifies a number of people that would have to be on that committee, and there's 2 options there, but essentially it's the Minister, either a State Premier or State Minister, and at least 3 experts in certain fields resident in that state. What we have said to all the communities is that's the overarching structure we have to follow with the Act. Under that, there is considerable flexibility. We have very deliberately said that we don't think it's right that Canberra turn up and tell communities how the money will be spent. We actually want to have the communities prioritise the projects that they're interested in. We will, at the time or ahead of that time, set up an appropriate structure with representatives from the community that will feed into that overarching committee that the Act provides for. So we want the fund very deliberately to be prioritised and targeted at the community needs.
But ultimately what the Act sets out is that it is the Minister's call.
That's right, Senator. Ultimately, someone has to be just responsible for administering the money.
I'll keep chipping through because I don't know how much I'm testing the Chair's patience.
No, you're right. I'm interested. I've heard it before, but it's always
some of this is new to me. The government has said it would immediately establish regional consultative committees in each of the shortlisted communities. So we're not calling the 6 a shortlist. Is that when we get down to 2 or 3?
That's right.
Okay. Can you give us an update on when you actually anticipate the shortlisting will occur? Like when do we go from 6 to 2 or 3?
The Minister has indicated he wants to make that decision as quickly as possible so that the communities are able to know where they stand. But at this point, we don't have a definite time frame, and that's really a matter for the government to decide.
Okay. So I'm getting news reports that a decision on the preferred site, when we go from 6 to 2 or 3 to 1, that the Minister wants to make that declaration by the end of the year. Is that your understanding as well?
That is correct. The timeline that we have roughly put down to communities is the shortlisting decision at the end of this consultation process, and I can't give you a definite time for that.
Maybe April or May or something.
Possible. With a decision on a preferred site, and that's a decision on a preferred site, it's not a decision on a final site, by the end of the year. That's the Minister's time frame that he's working to.
And just then sketch for me, just for the sake of completeness, how do we go from preferred to final?
Well, after the Minister has a decision around the preferred site, there needs to be some more detailed engineering and business case development work. That then has to go through some government processes around public works and expenditure of monies. After that point, once we're confident that the site will meet those tests and has received those approvals, it will then become the final site. The time frame for that, Michael?
Regulatory approvals, EPBC.
Yeah, then we have to, at the end of that point, then we have to embark upon the independent regulatory approvals processes, the EPBC and the ARPANSA approvals processes. We have indicative timeframes on our website around that, but once we start going that far out, they are more indicative than real. We anticipate, if everything goes well, that we would be able to receive a licence to start construction around 2018-ish, with a view to having a facility beginning to operate sometime after 2020.
So do you have a sense? No, it's got a couple more. I'm almost through.
Yeah, no worries.
How many times do you anticipate the regional committees, the consultative committees, would then meet before you went from your shortlist to your preferred site?
We think they will be quite dynamic committees. What we've said to each of the consultations so far is that if you're a shortlisted community, we intend to sit down with that community and work up quite a significant amount of detail before it goes to a preferred site. As I was saying to Senator Rhiannon, we want the community at the end of that decision-making process, when the Minister comes to make a decision on the preferred site, to have a very good understanding of the project proposal. So we will work with them on detailed design options for the site, risk and safety case, environmental monitoring structures. We will work with them on a communication strategy around the site. We will also work with them, importantly, on the community benefits package and other community benefits that might flow from this. We are going to sit down with each community and work out what the capacities in each of the communities might be to participate in the construction and operation of the site. Is there training and accreditation needed for their businesses to be able to take advantage of those opportunities? At the end of that process, each community will have a very good idea of what it is that we would actually be proposing in their area, and that's the point at which we seek their informed consent for hosting a site. That's when the Minister will make a decision on the preferred site.
At what point is there a cutout? And I'm still very interested, as I guess many people are, in what your consent thresholds are. At all 6 sites, you presently have groups of people not being manipulated from the outside or by enviro groups or by us in the Australian Greens, but genuine homegrown grassroots movements of people turning up to your consultation saying, we don't want to be consulted at, we want this to stop. What are your consent thresholds? How are you going to do this? You can't do it on the basis of pure numbers. How are you going to do it?
At the end of the day, the decision around accepting a nomination and what constitutes community support to move forward is a decision by the Minister. There's no specified threshold. We're not aware of any methodology or science that sort of indicates a threshold number. It really is a composite picture of community views, which will be taken into account in a balanced judgment by the Minister at the time. It's not possible. Any sort of single threshold number is arbitrary.
Well, it doesn't quite feel like a numbers game. I don't have the answers. All I know is that you've got quite strong opposition at all 6 sites.
We have experts on our advisory panel on this sort of part of the process. Co-chair, Associate Professor Ashworth, she does a lot of work in this area. There is no standard methodology that can be applied here. It really is a matter for the Minister and balanced judgment. And at the end of the day, he is accountable for the decision he makes.
Indeed. All right, a couple more quick ones then, if I may.
We had a couple of quick ones before.
That's correct. And I've got a couple more. As long as I don't start to repeat myself. If I start to repeat myself...
No, but look, we were scheduled to finish in 10 minutes and we've got anti-dumping, but because it's a pet subject of mine, I'm giving you some latitude.
That's so dodgy. I will hurry up. Anti-dumping is also very important, and yes, it's partly why I'm here as well. So
it is important, you're quite right.
I understand that the annual operating costs, and I can't remember exactly where I sourced this figure from, so tell me if I'm getting it wrong. The annual operating expenditure for the facility would be somewhere in the order of $10 million, not to be confused with the community benefits package.
That's right, Senator. So and these are estimates, they're not hard figures. Last year we did a indicative business case which was developed on the basis of a concept design, largely based on the model of the Spanish facility at El Cabril. That suggested to us that you would have construction costs of over $100 million and probably an annual operating budget of around $10 million. So that's the number we're using. We will know more in the next and subsequent phases when we develop the detailed business case.
Okay. I want to bring you then to the business case, and maybe this is where we'll finish up, and I'll put a couple others on notice since we're over time. The business case, the most interesting part of that business case work for me was that's where you're establishing what material will actually go to the dump. Mm-hmm. So when are you going to be in a position to tell the communities in these areas what is scheduled to go to the dump? And you'll have probably heard me sing this tune before. When will they know whether you're proposing to bring that long-lived intermediate level stuff there? Because that for me is another real threshold question. There's a consultation going on, but people don't know what the character of the material is that you're proposing to put there.
Okay. So in the consultations that we've undertaken, we've been very clear. I must admit it hasn't always been, I think, understood, but I thought we've been very clear. The proposal for this facility is definitely for the disposal of low-level waste, with the option of having a centralised intermediate waste store. We do say that in the detailed business case process, that is an option that will be tested, but it is the government's preference at this point for this to be a co-located facility for the storage of intermediate, the temporary storage of intermediate and the permanent disposal. Yeah. When will they be in a position to know exactly when that will be finalised? I would like to think it would be by the end of the year, but I can't absolutely promise that.
So you could have gone all the way through to choosing a preferred, not a final, but choosing a preferred site, gone through the entire shortlisting process without anybody, potentially even including you, knowing what's actually going to be dumped there?
The options that we will be presenting to the community will cover all the options that will be going into the detailed business case assessment. So there won't be any possibility that an option will be selected that they don't know about when they're asked about the preferred site design.
Okay. It still seems completely arse backwards to me, but it's your process. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thanks very much.